The flight from Calgary landed 40 minutes late, and by the time I got through baggage claim and into a cab, it was almost 10:30 at night. I'd been gone 11 days. 11 days in Vancouver for a project audit that kept getting extended, kept bleeding into weekends, kept pulling me away from home longer than I'd ever been away since my son was born. I remember sitting in that cab watching the Edmonton highway lights blur past and feeling this specific kind of tired, not just from the flight but from missing him. From missing the smell of his hair and the way he still reached for my hand in parking lots, even though he was 5 now, and trying very hard to seem like he didn't need to anymore. I texted my husband from the cab, just landed, be home by 11, how's Owen? He didn't answer. I figured he was asleep. He went to bed early when I wasn't there. That was his thing, a habit from before we got married that he'd never quite let go of. I didn't think anything of it. When the cab turned onto our street in Sherwood Park, I noticed the lights were on. All of them. Living room, kitchen, even the back porch light was on, which we never used in March because it faced north, and the cold just poured in. I remember thinking it looked like a party. And then I remember the exact moment that thought curdled into something else. There were 2 cars in the driveway I didn't recognize. One was a silver Kia with a Manitoba plate. My sister had moved to Winnipeg 2 years ago. I paid the cab driver and stood on the front step with my suitcase for a moment before I opened the door. I could hear music. I could hear laughing. I could hear my husband's voice doing this thing it does when he's trying to be charming, this slightly louder version of himself that he performed for people he wanted to impress. And then I heard something else. A small sound, almost underneath all the other noise. Coming from the side of the house, near the garage. I left my suitcase on the step and walked around the side path, the one we always meant to put proper lighting on and never did. My phone flashlight barely cut through the dark, and there, sitting on the cold concrete step outside the garage door in his dinosaur pajamas, no socks, no coat, was my son. He had his stuffed rabbit pressed against his chest with both arms. His nose was running, his feet were bare on the concrete. When the phone light hit his face, he squinted and then he saw it was me, and his whole body just collapsed. He made a sound I'd never heard him make before and launched himself off that step and into my arms so fast I nearly fell backward. "Mama," he said. Just that, Mama. He was shaking, whether from cold or from crying I couldn't tell. Both, probably. I held him there in the dark for I don't know how long, feeling his hands fisted in my jacket, feeling how small and cold his feet were against my legs. I kept saying, I've got you, I've got you, I've got you like a loop because I didn't trust myself to say anything else yet. The rage was already there, but I needed to be steady for him first. I carried him inside through the side door that goes straight into the laundry room. I grabbed the blanket off the hook, the fleece one we kept there for hockey mornings, and wrapped it around his feet. He had dried tear tracks on his face. He'd been crying for a while before I got there. That much was obvious, the kind of crying that eventually exhausts itself into silence. I sat with him on the laundry room floor for a few minutes. Just sat there, letting him warm up, listening to the party happening 20 feet away. Then I walked into the kitchen. My husband was at the stove. My sister was sitting at the island. Her 2 kids, a 7-year-old and a 4-year-old, were on the living room floor in front of the TV with full bowls of popcorn, a juice box each, a throw blanket pulled between them. They looked warm. They looked comfortable. My sister had a glass of red wine in her hand. There were takeout containers on the counter. Someone had ordered from the Good Thai place on Baseline Road. Nobody noticed me come in for a full 3 seconds. Then my husband turned around. "Hey," he said. Just hey, like I'd walked in from getting the mail. "I didn't hear you." My sister looked up. Something moved across her face. Not guilt exactly. More like the particular expression of someone recalculating. "Where was Owen?" I said. "What?" "Where was Owen, Ryan?" He set down the spatula. He wanted to go outside for a bit. He was sitting on the garage step, in his pajamas. No coat, no socks. It's 4 degrees out. The room did that thing rooms do. The music felt too loud suddenly. My sister put her wine glass down. "He was only out there for a few minutes," my husband said. His voice had shifted to the one he used when he thought he was being reasonable, and I was being difficult. I knew that voice very well by then. He was crying, I said. He was freezing and he was crying, and he has been outside long enough that his feet are like ice. And you are in here, making dinner. For guests. Adele. Don't. I looked at my sister. She was watching me with this careful, neutral expression that I'd seen before and never quite known what to make of. We weren't close, not really. Not since our parents' divorce had split our childhood into two separate stories. But she was my sister. I'd invited her. I'd been the one who pushed for her to visit more, who felt guilty every Christmas that we weren't doing better at being family. How long have you been here? I asked her. We got in this afternoon, she said. Ryan said you'd be back later this week. I texted Ryan from the airport 3 hours ago. She looked at my husband. He looked at the stove. That was the first crack, the first place where something showed through. I took Owen to his room, changed him into warm socks, got him under his covers, and read him 2 chapters of the book we'd been working through together, the one about the mouse who becomes a lighthouse keeper. He fell asleep halfway through the 2nd chapter with his rabbit tucked under his chin. I sat there in the dark for a while after, watching him breathe. Then I came back downstairs and told my sister she and her kids needed to find somewhere else to stay tonight. She left. She didn't make a scene about it, which surprised me. Maybe she could see something in my face that told her it wasn't the moment. Ryan and I talked until 2 in the morning. Or rather, I asked questions and he answered them in the way people answer things when they're trying to manage what you find out rather than actually tell you the truth. It took me a long time to understand that distinction, that there's a difference between someone being honest and someone being strategic with information. I'd always thought Ryan was honest. I thought that was one of the things I could count on. It came out in pieces, over days, not all at once. First, it was that he'd been talking to my sister more than I knew. Phone calls, texts. He said it started because he was struggling while I was traveling for work and she'd been going through her own separation and they'd just, as he put it, been there for each other. I accepted that because I wanted to accept it. Then it was that the phone calls had been late at night, after midnight sometimes, while I was in Vancouver, while I was in Ottawa, while I was in Toronto for the contracts conference in October. Then it was the bank statements. I found them by accident in March, while I was looking for our property tax documents. We had a joint savings account. We'd opened it right after Owen was born. The kind of thing you do when you're building something together and you believe in it enough to put money toward it. We called it the house fund because the plan was to buy something bigger before Owen started school. We'd been putting in $2,000 a month each of us for over 4 years. There was $31,000 left. We had put in close to $200,000. The withdrawal started 2 years ago, the same month my sister separated from her ex-husband. I sat at the kitchen table with those statements for a long time. Owen was at daycare. The house was very quiet. I looked at the dates, the amounts, the way it had come out in pieces. 2,000 here, 5,000 there. One particularly bad month, where 12,000 had moved in a single transfer to an account I didn't recognize. I looked at the dates and matched them to things I remembered. That time Ryan had seemed stressed about something he said was work-related. The month my sister's car had broken down and she'd mentioned offhandedly that she was dealing with it. The renovation she'd had done on her Winnipeg apartment last spring. I didn't cry. I want to be accurate about that because I've told this story a few times now and people seem to expect that I cried. I didn't. I felt very cold and very clear. The way you feel sometimes in the middle of a crisis before the emotion catches up with the information. I made an appointment with a family lawyer the next morning. Her office was in St. T. Albert, a 40-minute drive, and I went alone and I paid for the consultation out of my own personal account, the one I'd kept separate since before I got married, because my mother had told me when I was 22 years old to always keep something that was only mine. I hadn't understood why then. I understood now. My lawyer's name was Patricia. She was 60 or so, very calm, with reading glasses on a chain, and the particular stillness of someone who had heard every version of every story and was no longer surprised by any of them. She let me talk. She asked clarifying questions. She took notes. When I was finished, she told me exactly what my options were and what the process would look like, and she was direct about the parts that would be hard and specific about what evidence would matter. She also told me to stop talking to Ryan about the money, to stop talking to my sister entirely, to let the legal process work and not to try to manage the situation through conversation, because conversation was not what the situation needed anymore. I tried to follow that advice. I mostly did. The hardest part was not confronting Ryan with what I'd found right away. I had this instinct to lay it all out, to make him sit there and look at what he'd done, to have the big scene where everything got named. Patricia told me that instinct would not help me. She said that what I needed right now was to gather everything I could while I still had access to it, and that once Ryan knew the extent of what I'd found, that access might disappear. So I gathered. I documented every statement I could pull from the joint account going back 4 years. I went through our shared email and screenshot anything relevant. There were more emails between Ryan and my sister than I'd known about, more than anyone would need to have with their spouse's sibling if the relationship was purely one of mutual support. Some of them I couldn't bring myself to read all the way through. Some of them I read twice because I couldn't believe it the first time. I found a receipt in his jacket pocket, a restaurant in Winnipeg for two on a Saturday in November when Ryan had told me he was at a conference in Saskatoon. I had stayed home that weekend with Owen. I remembered it. It had been a good weekend, actually. Owen and I had made pancakes and gone to the Valley Zoo, and he'd fallen asleep in the car on the way home, and I'd sat in the driveway listening to him breathe, feeling grateful. I put the receipt in the folder with everything else. My sister called me 3 times in April. I didn't answer. She texted once, a long message, the kind that starts with, "I know you probably don't want to hear from me," and ends with something that sounds like an apology but isn't quite one. I read it. I didn't reply. Patricia had been clear. What I hadn't expected was how much Owen understood. He was 5, and 5-year-olds know more than they're given credit for. He knew something was different. He started asking where Daddy was going when Ryan would leave in the evenings, and why Daddy slept in the other room sometimes, and whether our cat Birdie knew when someone was sad because Birdie kept sitting on my feet. I answered him as honestly as I could in 5-year-old terms. I told him that sometimes grown-ups had problems they needed to work out, and that no matter what happened, he was always going to have both of us, and that nothing was his fault. He seemed to accept this. He kept checking in with me in small ways, bringing me drawings, asking if I wanted to watch his shows with him. The gentle surveillance of a child who was old enough to sense anxiety and young enough to try to fix it with presence. I loved him so much during those months that it was almost painful. Like a bruise you keep pressing. The legal process moved slowly and then all at once. Patricia filed in May, Ryan hired his own lawyer, and there was a period of several weeks where everything happened through intermediaries, and I would get updates from Patricia in her calm, measured emails and have to sit with the information alone in my car before I felt ready to go back inside the house. The financial disclosure phase was when things got complicated. Ryan's lawyer argued that the withdrawals from the joint account had been made with my implicit knowledge, because I had access to the account statements and had never raised concerns. Patricia dismantled this argument efficiently and without drama, pointing out the specific dates of the transfers, the account they had gone to, and the fact that Ryan had been the sole signatory on the destination account. She had a forensic accountant review the records. The accountant's report was 17 pages long and described, in precise professional language, a systematic pattern of transfers that had moved approximately $168,000 out of our joint savings over 26 months. Ryan's parents offered to cover part of what he owed, which surprised me. I don't know what conversations happened in that family that I wasn't part of. I didn't ask. Patricia handled the settlement negotiations, and I let her. My sister was not named in the legal proceedings directly, which Patricia said was appropriate given what we could and couldn't prove. But what became clear during the financial disclosure process was that a significant portion of the money had been used to cover my sister's separation expenses, her legal fees, deposits on a new apartment, the Winnipeg renovation, a used minivan she'd bought in January. Ryan's lawyer did not dispute this. I don't know exactly what I expected to feel when it was over. The settlement was finalized in September, 14 months after I'd stood in the dark listening to my son cry outside the garage. Ryan paid back the agreed amount over a structured schedule. I got the house. Ryan moved into a rental near White Man Drive. Owen spent alternating weeks with each of us, which was the hardest part to adjust to. The weeks he wasn't home were a kind of silence I had no reference point for. I would walk past his bedroom door at night and have to remind myself that he was okay, that he was just somewhere else, that somewhere else was not the same as gone. My mother asked me once, around Christmas of that year, whether I was angry. We were sitting in her kitchen in Red Deer drinking instant coffee, which she has made the same way my entire life and which I find deeply comforting. She asked it carefully, the way she asked difficult things, looking at her mug rather than at me. I thought about it for a while before I answered. I was angry. Past tense felt right by then mostly. What I discovered was that anger at that scale has a kind of half-life. It burns hot and then it starts to convert into something else, something more like clarity. I was angry about Owen on that concrete step in March. I was angry about the money and about the lying. I was angry about all those late-night calls while I was traveling for work, working for us, making the salary that funded the account, that funded the fund that funded my sister's minivan. But the anger I'd felt most purely, the one I still carried in some quiet part of myself, was about the smaller thing. The thing that had happened before I knew any of the rest of it. Owen on that step in the cold, in his dinosaur pajamas, holding his rabbit, crying, while 20 feet away, a party was happening. That was the thing that had made the rest of it possible. Once, I'd stood in the dark holding my freezing son and felt what I felt in that moment. Every decision that followed had become, if not easy, then at least clear. I told my mother I was doing better, and that was true. In the way that things are true when you've made it through to the other side of something and can see it from a little distance, and can also see yourself still standing, which is the part that surprises you. Owen started grade 1 in September. On his first day, he wore the new backpack he picked out himself, bright orange, with a rocket ship on it, and walked into that school like someone with places to be. I stood on the sidewalk and watched until I couldn't see him anymore. Then I went to my car, and I sat there for a few minutes, and I let myself feel all of it. The grief, the relief, the love, the strange unmoored pride of watching a person you made walk away from you on purpose. Then I started the car and went to work. I keep coming back to the image of Owen on that concrete step. Dinosaur pajamas, no socks, his rabbit pressed against his chest like it was the only solid thing left. That image was the truth of everything before I even knew what everything was. I've thought a lot about what made it possible to get through what came after. The statements, the lawyer's office, the months of legal back and forth, the weeks when Owen was at Ryan's and the house was too quiet. I don't think it was any single decision. I think it was the accumulation of small choices made before the crisis arrived. The personal account I'd kept since I was 22, because my mother said to. The habit of paying attention to our finances even when nothing seemed wrong. The instinct, when I found those statements, to go quiet rather than go loud. People talk about integrity like it's a personality trait you either have or you don't. I don't think that's right. I think it's something you build slowly, in ordinary moments, long before you need it. Ryan had been building something too, but what he'd built was a version of himself that could look me in the eye and lie, that could make late-night calls while I was traveling for work, that could watch our savings disappear over 2 years and say nothing. That's also built slowly, in ordinary moments. Both things are. What I learned, not from this experience in some tidy lesson-shaped way, but gradually the way you learn anything real, is that how you think matters as much as what you feel. I felt betrayed. Of course I did. But feeling betrayed and thinking clearly are not mutually exclusive, and keeping them both in the room together is harder than anyone tells you. Patricia kept reminding me not to let the anger drive, not because the anger wasn't justified, but because the anger wasn't strategic. And what I needed to be right then was strategic. I had to understand the situation as it actually was, not as I wished it had been, or feared it might become. That kind of clear-eyed thinking, the willingness to look at a hard truth and keep your hands steady, that's not something that comes naturally to most people. It didn't come naturally to me. I had to choose it, over and over. Every time I wanted to pick up the phone and say things that would have felt good in the moment and cost me later. And then there's the part that doesn't get talked about enough, which is just the getting through it, the showing up to work, the reading Owen his Lighthouse Mouse book, even when I was running on 4 hours of sleep, and the hurt was sitting right behind my sternum like something lodged, the driving to St. Albert, the signing of documents, the answering of Owen's careful 5-year-old questions with as much honesty as I could fit into words he could hold. There's no shortcut through that part. You just have to be willing to stay in it, day after day, until you're through. Owen started grade 1 in September. He picked an orange backpack with a rocket ship. He walked into that school like he owned the hallway. I think about who he's watching me be. I think about that more than almost anything else. He won't remember the details of this year when he's older. Not the legal filings, not the forensic accountant's report, not the specific number on the bank statement, but he'll have been shaped by it anyway, by watching how his mother moved through something hard, whether she folded or kept going, whether she was honest even when honesty was inconvenient, whether she got back in the car and went to work. That's the only legacy I actually care about leaving him.